This is different because we're not talking about just an affirmation of the existence of UFOs. We are now talking about the reality in which these things have been retrieved, crash retrievals, bodies have been recovered along with them, and reverse engineering has been underway for decades. Bodies have been recovered along with them. Bodies have been recovered along with them.
The history of our Earth is so different from what we can imagine.
Enjoy the journey.
The Smithsonian, that if they found out about a large skeleton somewhere, was to go get it.
I'm going to assume at least one person is right, because if one person's right, it busts the paradigm.
It all goes back to the fallen cherub. And the problem with the modern day church, they have a very truncated view of the supernatural.
This backdrop that's just pregnant with all kinds of meaning associated with this Mount Hermon event.
Welcome to Blurry Creatures.
And this guy defects from the kingdom. That's a big deal.
Welcome to Blurry Creatures. It's been a heavy week and a hot week for a lot of people in terms of in these paranormal spaces talking about aliens, UFOs, and all the things that come with that. A lot of people on both sides, a lot of opinions being thrown out. We decided, to put that into some sort of constructive way. Let's have a podcast about it with one of our favorite guests, Tim Alberino, who we're heading to Peru with in a couple weeks here.
In a matter of days, we'll be in Peru with Timmy A.
But Tim's devoted a lot of his life to these weird topics, and lately, in the last couple of years, obviously writing his book, Birthright, Tim's devoted a lot of time to try to break down for Christians specifically what this means and how to view these things from a biblical paradigm, how to strengthen your faith by them, not have your faith challenged or weakened. And that's why I think we really like having these conversations with Tim, because it always leaves me having more confidence in my relationship with God and not like freaked out and scared. And so I think that's why we talk about it and maybe kick a dead horse sometimes on the show with him. But if you haven't listened to our previous episodes with him, probably, what do you say, Luke? Worth it? Probably go back?
Probably start there and then jump in. It'll be a lot of a requisite foundational knowledge that we're kind of going to jump off in. And it's, like you said, this is the week to do it. There's been a ton of stuff in the news. We thought we had a big month in February with a lot of what we consider to be disclosure, and then this week kind of blew the roof off that with the whistleblower, the craft being recovered, etc. So we figured we'd talk about it. It lands squarely in our space, and so if you have a little bit of UFO fatigue, we apologize. I think this is going to be different, and also very interesting. An interesting look at a very blurry look at what's going on, and perhaps some ways to think about and contextualize that as always. So, always grateful for Tim and his time coming on. He's been talking about this for years. He is one of those 10,000 hour guys who's really put in the research. These conclusions that he's come to, as we'll say in the show. These are not fly-by-night knee-jerk reactions or conclusions. Tim has spent a lot of time researching and really putting in the thought process into this phenomena. And so this is going to be a fun one. Every time that Tim joins the Blurryverse, we have a good time. So looking forward to him. He is a man of the hour, right? Anytime these things pop up, Tim is in demand. And so
yeah,
great to have our good friend Tim Alberino back on the show today.
Let's get Tim on this one and get blurry. Luke, here we are.
Nate, we're here again, Nate. Here we are again.
Here we are we're in the back of the Timborghini here, and he's going to drive us.
Timborghini? Alberari.
The Alberari. I like that. We're in the back of the Alberari.
It actually sounds like it could be an exotic car.
It's true.
Yeah.
I drive a Tacoma. Why don't you just say Tim Coma?
Tim Coma.
Dude.
That sounds like a disease.
Dude, don't start something, Tim. This is going to come back. Tim Coma.
He's in a Tim Coma. He's just like, that's when Tim's just staring at the wall thinking about his next book in megaliths.
Dude, let's start the show, can we here? Let's go. This is getting...
Anyway, we started
we're 23 minutes in, bro. Let's go.
Yeah, welcome back to Blurry Creatures. On this podcast, we talk about all the weird blurry creatures out there. And before this show got rolling, we were talking with Tim. And if those of you guys don't know Tim Alberino, where have you been? Come on. Get on YouTube and watch Tim Alberino's stuff. Read his book. But Tim said, this is the biggest news story of the century.
I think that what's unfolded in the last few days could turn out to be, assuming it's true, could turn out to be the biggest news story. And of course, we're referring to the whistleblower, David Grusch. Everybody knows about this. Everybody's been tracking with this, who came out and talked about a secret program that the Pentagon has running for the recovery of UFOs and reverse engineering of UFO technology and the recovery of alien bodies. So that's what we're referring to.
Yeah, and I know some people have UFO fatigue, and we've been doing a lot of stuff like this, a lot of social media posts. So we're trying not to cover some of the things we've covered a lot on this show before. And we'll try to get some fresh stuff here, but can you give us sort of, for those that don't know what's going on, we had a couple of major events. Not only have whistleblowers, but we had this UFO crash and these 10-foot tall grays in this dude's backyard. It's made all the rounds on all the videos and all the channels that we follow. We've even posted it. There's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah. Was your breakdown this last week for us? And
well, you had the David Grusch revelations, which are ongoing. I mean, last night they published the full interview on News Nation, and in the midst of this, of course, we had that Vegas incident with that whatever it was that was recorded on the body cam of the police officer that came down in that Vegas neighborhood. And then you had that family that called the police and said that they had these 8 to 10 foot tall alien beings in their backyard. And then subsequently there was some video released. I didn't really know. I was kind of commenting on that. I did some commentary on that in real time because I was on a different radio show 20 minutes after that story broke. So we were kind of breaking it down, and I don't really know what to think of the Vegas thing. In the beginning, I was a little skeptical about it, but at the same time, there was some things about it that seemed pretty authentic. Obviously, the police officer caught it on the body cam, whatever it was, falling out of the sky. And then, of course, the kid, I think his name is Angel, released a video recently where he describes in greater detail the incident and the being. And then YouTube and social media, Twitter, Instagram started to get flooded with these videos, heavily pixelated, blurry videos of potential creatures in these frames when you blow them up. And of course, we live in an era now, we live in the age of AI, and I think it's becoming obviously increasingly easier to fabricate stuff in videos. But I have to say, there's one video in particular, I don't know if you guys saw it. There's two videos that people are passing around. And this is the video of Channel 8 in Vegas. They were interviewing this family, and they were walking into the backyard through the gate, and then they cut the camera because they said it was private property and they didn't want to film back there. They weren't allowed to film back there. But as they're walking into the backyard, there's some people have taken that video. You get a very short snippet of this area. We say backyard, but really they have this area behind their house where they have a forklift and they have some cars. I guess they work on cars or something back there. And so everybody's taking that snapshot and blowing it up and seeing if they can find that video, that clip, and blowing it up and seeing if they can spot anything. And I have to say, I've seen one video in particular that looks really convincing. I'm not going to say that it's real. I'm just going to say that it's compelling, and probably a lot of people have seen it. You see this, I don't know if you guys have seen it. You see this thing behind the forklift, and it is very large. It looks at least 7.5 feet tall minimum. And it's got a big bulbous head and black almond shaped eyes. And it looks at the camera. And of course, it's heavily pixelated because they're zooming in on probably what is a 1920 by 1080 pixel image, and they're zooming way in on it. So that Vegas thing, I don't know what to make of it. It's really weird. Part of me says it's maybe a hoax, but a part of me says it's maybe authentic. So I guess I'm split right down the middle on that 50-50. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we get so many fake videos sent to us. And just today, like, I was looking at some videos that everyone said, oh, this is a haunted house. And I could totally tell. I blew it all up and I could see that it was fake because the lines didn't match up. And there's so many guys that are hoaxing out there. But sometimes the crappy footage is the footage that I think is more credible because it's just nobody knows what they're doing and they're filming. But yeah, I saw one where a guy broke it down. It looked like one was behind the fence and is reaching fingers through. I don't know if you saw
that too.
Yeah. And then there was one in the background in the corner, just a couple frames you could see a head and some, like you said, the bulbous eyes. So it's hard because we're also trying to produce content on our Instagram and Facebook page and all that stuff. We're not really a social media platform, but we do put our stuff on social media. And so I don't know, there's always that part of me that's like, there's a lot of accounts that just they don't vet it. We try to vet it, and if someone comes back and say this is bunk, then we would take it down. I was gonna post it, but so many people were. I'm like you. I'm like 60-40. I think some of it's legit. I'm not 100% sure. They didn't seem like they were trying to hoax anything.
We, like you guys have all echoed, I would say the same thing. We live in a time of like the TikTok clout, right? Where just in this age, people rush to be the first and not necessarily to be the most accurate. And at the same time, they're looking for clicks and for likes and not necessarily for accuracy. So you have to wade through that mess with everything, right? And it just felt a little bit like it was authentic because you got a body cam, you have what felt like some authentic reactions from law enforcement, and then you have a real story running on the news. And the news, of course, in the last 5-10 years, we've come to realize you can't trust everything there or most of anything. But it was interesting. The timing is interesting as well, considering all things held equal, that what we have going on this week. And maybe these last few months, right? We've had an episode, Tim, and we talked a lot about, the Chinese balloon, this idea that we shot down UFOs and Justin Trudeau shot one down and all this stuff that's just really unbelievable. But you have all these little steps to disclosure, and then we have this video, this Vegas thing in the same week that we have the whistleblower stuff, which I know we want to get to next. So perhaps this is a good transition, but it's just it's maybe great timing or maybe odd timing, but at the same time, it just feels like everything's kind of coming to a crescendo.
Certainly. And, one thing that I think some people are not thinking about, have not considered in regard to this whistleblower is the context in which this occurred. Because, there's a lot of people out there who are saying, well, if the government's saying it, I don't believe it. Well, the government isn't saying this. This is a whistleblower. I think what he's saying is contrary to the narrative that the government wants out. Yes, the news is carrying it, but it's News Nation. It's more of an online platform. News Nation is trying to get away from the stigma of CNN and some of these bigger organizations, although they do have some of the talent from CNN. They have Chris Cuomo over there, and some of these other personalities. But we're seeing a shift in the news right now because I think, as we all realize, mainstream media is going broke. Nobody listens to them. Nobody believes them. I mean, people believed them before COVID. Nobody believes them anymore. They have a very, very small audience at this point. Tucker Carlson, who obviously got fired from Fox News, has been doing his show on Twitter and has been absolutely destroying these other news networks, the mainstream media, in terms of viewership. He's getting tens of millions of views.
He just got a cease and desist because of it too.
I didn't know, from Fox News.
Yeah, they sent him a cease and desist, trying to shut him down because.
Wow. Yeah, he was like, what did his first video get? Like, I think it was like 56 million last time I looked at it. It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
So I say that to highlight the point that a lot of these new organizations are trying to distance themselves from mainstream media, and so that's why the fact that the News Nation broke this story, it gives me a little bit more confidence, a little bit more confidence than if it were a mainstream network. But the context that I'm talking about, that I was referring to in the beginning, is that a week before this story broke, the whistleblower, David Grusch, on News Nation, I don't know if you guys saw this, but NASA did their first hearing on UAPs. Did you see that? NASA came out and about a year ago, NASA commissioned a advisory board, which was tasked with studying UAPs. And it just so happens a week before the whistleblower, they came out and they did their first hearing, their first public hearing. And listen to this statement. I've said this a few times in different interviews because I'm not hearing anyone else really repeating this. I think this is very important context. So keep in mind, this happened a week before the whistleblower. Right out of the gates, this is the statement that Dan Evans, who's the study director at NASA, this is what he said at the hearing, right out of the gates, okay? And I want you to understand that this is what I consider to be the official narrative. He said this: I want to emphasize this loud and proud, that there is absolutely no convincing evidence for extraterrestrial life associated with UAPs. That's what NASA said a week before the whistleblower. And then after the whistleblower story, the Pentagon came out and released their official statement. And they said, to date, AARO, which is the All-Domain Anomaly Resolutions Office, they came out and said that to date, AARO has not discovered any verifiable information to substantiate claims that any programs regarding the possession or reverse engineering of extraterrestrial materials have existed in the past or exist currently. So that was the official statement from the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. And by the way, David Grusch, the whistleblower, used to work for that office, and this is how he got in trouble, because he was trying to penetrate into this crash retrieval program that he caught wind of, and he was not read into the program. In other words, he was denied access. So that's where it began. So now we know what the official narrative is from the government, NASA being a part of this, is now there's nothing to see here. These are just, we're investigating anomalous lights in the sky. We're investigating these events that people see that we don't know really what it is. It could be anything. That's the Pentagon's position. That is their narrative, and that's the one that they want to maintain. So this whistleblower is, for people who maybe don't understand this point, this whistleblower is not parroting a narrative that is sanctioned by the Pentagon. Yes, he did get some of what he said. In fact, all of what he said, he did get it signed off. In other words, he was allowed to disclose what he disclosed, to say what he said. And some things he wasn't, by the way. There were things that they didn't allow him to talk about. He wasn't allowed to talk about Roswell, for example. So, and that is strange, but there's lots of things that could be said about that. But we know what the official position is. We know what the whistleblower said, and those two things are not in harmony. And so the question is, do we have dueling factions inside of the Pentagon? Are there dueling factions in the deep state, in the dumb state, as I call it? One faction that absolutely wants the lid tight on this thing, does not want to talk about crash retrievals, does not want to talk about extraterrestrials, does not want to talk about, obviously, all the other things that go along with it. And then maybe there's another faction in there that is feels that it's their patriotic duty to tell the American people, or that it's time for some disclosure to some extent. I don't think anybody in there wants full disclosure, because I think that they want America to maintain whatever kind of competitive edge it has from the technologies that we've been able to derive from the retrieved craft. So this is all very interesting. So I think people right away want to say, A, I don't believe the government, B, I don't believe the media, right? And just kind of sweep this under the table. But I think we need to be a little careful there. This isn't exactly the mainstream media, and this is not the narrative that the government is pushing, that the Pentagon is pushing. Their narrative is what NASA said. Their narrative is their response. So I just wanted to sort of lay that out there for people to consider.
Yeah, and I think that, if you're listening to this podcast, go back and listen to some of our previous episodes. I think we're kind of jumping in 100 miles an hour here. We've talked like you said, ad nauseum about some of these subjects before. But Tim, why do you think this? Okay, so the last several years, there's been a lot of these moments, right? Why is this one different than some of the previous things that have come out since 2017-ish?
This is different because we're not talking about just an affirmation of the existence of UFOs. We are now talking about the reality in which these things have been retrieved, crash retrievals, bodies have been recovered along with them, and reverse engineering has been underway for decades, which of course your audience is aware of the fact that I've been saying this for a long time, and that's what I have believed, because ufologists have known this for decades, that these things are true. So, and by the way, I have been listening to some of the ufologists, and for those who don't know, ufologists are people who study the UFO phenomenon in an academic way. I would add that to that description. And I've been following some of the people who I trust the most and adding in my own analysis as well. And I would say that we're all in accord in our analysis here. And it is that none of us can say for sure if David Grusch is telling the truth. We don't know what his motives are. So we can't say that. I think his credentials are well established. But we don't know why he's saying what he's saying, and we don't know if he's telling the truth. But what we all can say in unison and do and are, and I mean ufologists, is that what he's saying is true. What he's saying is true. And that is the most important part to me. I don't really care what his motives are. And I frankly don't even care if this is supposed to play into some sort of a deception narrative or something like that. I'm just analyzing what he said. Does what he said conform to what we have known for decades as it relates to the field of ufology? And the answer is yes. There are no red flags. There's nothing he said is coming out of left field, so to speak. Nothing he said is drawing a red flag for me or any of the ufologists that I respect and whose work I know to be very academic. And so that's another thing I think people need to keep in mind. What the man is saying is true. Now, whether or not he's lying, I don't know. And that may sound contradictory, but it's not. What he's saying is true, regardless of whether he's making up the story.
So he said, he made some bullet points, things like they have at least 12 craft in possession that are not human built, stuff like that, right? Like
yes. And in fact, I think I don't know if it was Grusch or somebody else who came forward. And by the way, before I say this, understand that Grusch he filed the whistleblower, whatever it's called, the complaint or whatever it's called, the official name for it. He went through official channels. He brought the evidence that he had to the Inspector General of the intelligence community and to Congress. And remember, we've got a body in Congress right now that's investigating UAPs, led by Congresswoman Gillibrand. There is a system in place right now to accommodate a whistleblower. That's never been the case before in history, ever. It's never been the case. It's only been the case for the last year that we have a body in Congress that is actively and they would like to think aggressively pursuing the truth behind quote unquote UAPs, UFOs. And so there is this architecture in place that is allowing a whistleblower to come on the scene, be taken seriously by the media. Why? Because the media has been discussing this for 3 years, right? You mentioned it, 2017, since 2017. And the individuals who broke this story are the very same people who got the ball rolling in 2017. They're the same journalists. It's Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal. They're the ones who broke the story in the debrief regarding this whistleblower, David Grusch, who comes from the intelligence community. I don't know if I mentioned that. David Grusch, he was an officer in the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency and the National Reconnaissance Office, and he worked for the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, the Pentagon's official UAP investigative body. And so those are his credentials. But aside from him, and this is something that journalist Leslie Kean has been saying on interviews, she has been approached by other individuals from inside of the intelligence communities with the same level of credentials as David Grusch, who have independently come to her and have gone to Congress to affirm what David Grusch has said. That's very important. So this is not like anything that's ever happened before. The closest thing would be the Bob Lazar situation that unfolded in the early 90s. But Bob Lazar was a different world back then. The media was laughing at UFOs. Remember, it was a big joke back then. Yeah. And there were certainly no committees in Congress investigating, or at least openly investigating, UFOs. None of that existed. So Bob Lazar was just swept under the table. He was laughed out of the room. But now we know, and I've always known this, but I think we can say definitively now that Bob Lazar was telling the truth. And so this is a different environment. This is unique. And that's why I said it potentially is the most important, let's call it, news headline that we have ever seen in the modern world. I mean, it's bigger than World War II. It's bigger than the atomic bomb being dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This is aliens are real. We're not alone in the universe. That's what this amounts to.
It's heavy. And I think, Luke, we've been talking about the deep state, just anyone who's down these rabbit holes for years. But I think what you're describing is important. We've talked about this in previous episodes. But what you have is multiple governments. You have a government on the surface, and you have a government underground.
The dumb state.
Yeah, the beast with many heads here. So, do you think that the ground government is starting to find out what the underground government has known for 100 years?
Yes. So, as I've said before, the dumb state, this is where, when I say dumb state, of course, I'm referring to deep underground military bases. So this is where the special access projects, the black budget projects, are taking place. They're on these secret underground installations, such as the S4 facility over at Groom Lake, and many, many more besides. The projects are being developed. It's a co-op between elements of the U.S. military and private contractors, such as Lockheed Martin, the aerospace company, and others, private contractors. The security for these bases is primarily private contractors. And that's why I always say, if you go over to Area 51, even today, especially 20 years ago, but even today, you go over to Area 51 and you try and walk through the desert and penetrate into that base, who are you going to be met with? You're going to be met with guys in black or camo fatigues. And those individuals are not going to be members of the United States military. Those individuals are going to be they're going to be private security contractors. They're going to be employees of a private security contracting firm. And it's interesting because David Grusch, going back to this whistleblower, one of the reasons why he came forward was because as he tried to penetrate into this secret crash retrieval and reverse engineering program, he started to get pushback from who? From the private contractors who were threatening him. And so he feared for his life. That's part of the reason why he came forward. By the way, that's the reason why Bob Lazar came forward too. Same scenario. The private contractors were threatening Bob Lazar's life, and were breaking into his home, and were following him, and were calling him up and threatening him and so forth.
And why? What is there an obvious reason why?
Yeah, because this is to them, to these guys who work on these bases, they don't have the need to know. We, as the American people, do not have the need to know about the alien presence or the alien technology. That is their realm. It's off the books. It's black budget funding. And these guys they're selected because they have a particular personality profile. These guys are very aggressive. They're highly aggressive. And they don't have allegiance to this is not patriotic. These private contractors are not patriotic. They're not doing this for America. They're doing this because they work for these contracting firms and they're getting paid a lot of money.
Yeah, the mercenaries. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're very aggressive. They're very, in many cases, and that's what they're paid to be, by the way. They're paid to be aggressive and to keep people away from these installations. And we would expect that. I mean, if we're developing advanced fighter jets, for example, we don't want the Chinese to get our technology. We don't want them sending spies around our bases. And so these guys have to be aggressive in that regard. But when it comes to the crash retrievals and reverse engineering of alien technology, in their mind, that's their purview. These contractors and there's only a very small amount of people, I think, in the military industrial complex spreading across the Pentagon and the intelligence agencies who really have access to these programs or even have been read into them. Very, very few. As I've said many times, most of the Pentagon, most of the personnel who work at the Pentagon, even the high-ranking generals, are not read into these programs. They don't have the need to know. And so they're not. The president of the United States it does not have the need to know. And as I've said many, many, many times, does not have a high enough clearance to access these facilities. Nobody in Congress has a high enough clearance to access these facilities. Now, I don't know what's going to happen because Congress is now calling for a serious investigation into the claims of David Grusch. And so are they going to want to, and they, by the way, David Grusch, part of the documentation and the proof that he gave to Congress and to the Inspector General of the intelligence community is the names of the individuals who are read into the program and the locations where these craft are being housed, are being harbored. Now, that is pretty remarkable because ostensibly Congress has in their hands right now the addresses of where these craft are sitting in the hangar bays, right? And I guarantee you they're all underground installations. And so this is really, it's an unprecedented situation, and it's amazing to witness. I feel like, and have felt for the last week, that we are witnessing an Apollo moon landing kind of event happening right now. And I don't think that it's really registered with most people. I've just been sitting here for 3-4 days just absorbing what's going on because it really is unprecedented.
It feels like Snowden. Yeah, because when Snowden came out and exposed the NSA for spying on Americans, right, and then simultaneously became, public enemy number one, I mean, he was revealing things that were going on in our security state that were unconstitutional, and he got vilified for it, and it still is, and it's Assange as well, right? But this is just a whole nother level. But it feels like that kind of watershed moment where you pull back the curtain and you realize that, like, the things that people have been talking about, like you wrote about Bob Lazar for decades. These things are, if you take this guy's word, are happening, and it's interesting because people always say, well, why does the government not know? And it's because this is corporate stuff. This is about money. This is about asymmetrical warfare. This is about advantages and technology that can be owned and then sold, right? And this is what
it's potentially about a breakaway civilization. The occult,
sure. I mean,
it's the Fourth Reich. I mean, all these things play into what's going on here. Maybe.
Yeah, I just think that people don't get that. It's not like this is not a necessarily a USA cover up. This feels like one of your not one of your, but one of those devolution type films where you have like you said, this breakaway, this faction that is collecting these things in order for, like I said, it's asymmetrical warfare. At the end of the day, it's acquiring technology no one else has to utilize for power purposes, whether that be economical or geopolitical, right? And this is 100% what's happening. It's just, if these reports are true. And then I think it's fascinating too that you go public, right? You go public for your own safety. I don't think people realize this. This isn't like and I would think you would say the same thing. This isn't a notoriety grab. Some people want to say that. And the thing that you address on the top, I think is important too, is that this is really hard to say this is a psyop. Everything is always it's a psyop. This is a psyop. Well, look what NASA said, and people say NASA, you can't trust them. It's a psyop with them, sure, or whatever. They do a lot of lying. Okay, get it. But all of the 3-letter agencies and everybody else that is part of the machine has the other narrative, right? And so then there's got to be some breadcrumbs to this, and I think it's fascinating. I think it lends credibility. And his credentials, I think, speak for themselves as well. But it leads credibility to say this isn't like the next guy, this stooge they have that's towing the line for this agenda and this overarching psyop. Blue.
Right. Well, if you believe it's a psyop, I don't believe what NASA says. Fine, I know that NASA isn't forthright, obviously.
Sure. Right.
But if you believe that. You don't believe in what NASA says. Well, would you then say that you would believe the opposite of what NASA says? Because they said, I want to emphasize this loud and proud that there is absolutely no convincing evidence for extraterrestrial life associated with UAPs. Mm-hmm. That's what NASA said. So believe the opposite of that. And what do you got? You got David Grusch. You got the whistleblower, right? I mean, that's the opposite of that statement.
Do you feel like, Tim, it's kind of like, it's like the snowball idea. It started small, back with Bob Lazar, and then it's kind of built. You got Rogan Alex Jones, Coast to Coast Radio. You've got Tucker talking about it on Fox News, and it's just become this massive snowball, and it's kind of built a lot of steam now. And now you got Congress people asking questions, and eventually this thing's going to get so massive, it's going to run into the side of the house, so to speak, coming down the mountain. And I think there's just all these major voices, and there are characters that people are starting to trust, like Joe Rogan. And that's where I heard the Bob Lazar story in 2018 when he was on his podcast. I was like, dang, I didn't really know the details of this. You got millions of people listening to these shows now and then going down their own rabbit holes. And so you have this huge distrust of all the corporate media, and then you have them slowly leaking out all this information. And so it just seems like it's building to this. It's building to like, all we need is one more big whistleblower to come out, and it's going to be undeniable.
Or Congress to go and force their way into one of these bases. But you know what, though? It wouldn't surprise me if these private contractors are already relocating all these craft. But and by the way, I wanted to make a point. And yes, it is building, but it's building primarily because of the phenomenon itself. The phenomenon is burgeoning. And I
should have thrown like TikTok and videos and all the things that are coming out,
Right. And because of the phenomenon is forcing the conversation, it's forcing the Pentagon to try to control the narrative, because it's burgeoning, it's increasing. But you mentioned the fact that these things are crashing. I forget what the context was when we were talking about how these things are crashing. And I think people got this false impression that UFOs are just crashing left and right all the time. And people are always saying, well, how can these things come from another planet or something and be so advanced, and then they come to Earth and they crash? We have to understand that we're talking about like 12 to 13 to 14 craft, right? And I always say, well, double it, make it 30. So let's say that even though we're only talking about a dozen of these craft that have been recovered through various means, let's double it. Let's say we're talking about 30. And then let's take a look at the time frame that we're dealing with since the 1920s. Mm-hmm. So 30 craft since the 1920s, you're not even getting like 2 or 3 a year. I mean, it's very rare to have an event in which one of these vehicles comes crashing to the ground. Obviously, it's never happened in the middle of New York City. It's never happened in the middle of Cleveland, Ohio. It's never happened in the middle of Dallas, Texas. These are rare events, and there could be dozens of explanations of why they happened. Not the least of which is, don't forget, this is probably factional. So maybe in some of these instances, they were shot down by other craft. So
non-human craft, like
exactly. So there's a lot of different explanations for that. So I don't want people to have the impression that all of a sudden UFOs are falling out of the sky like crazy. Yeah, that Vegas thing. But when's the last time we had a story like that? It's been a long time. I mean, you can find stories like that in the history of ufology, but they're few and far between, especially when you have like body cam attached to it, video. They're very, very, very rare, assuming it happened. Let's just assume for the sake of argument that it's real, right?
Well, this is perfect timing, because we talked about this last week, Tim. Like, our episode last week was the top 3 UFO crashes over the last, over a long period of time. And that's kind of what we talked about. It's very rare. And why? What I think that's a great question. I think we proposed that on the episode. Why couldn't 2 of these factions be warring with each other and shoot each other down? Because some people are like, oh, there's no way an advanced civilization can get shot down. Well, if 2 advanced civilizations are going at it, it seems pretty obvious that at some point they're going to be able to take some people out. Right?
Nate, and I said this last week too, is that no technology is infallible. So the idea over the long amounts of time that you don't have catastrophic failures or error, these aren't.
That's right.
These aren't like infallible beings or whatever you want to ascribe to driving these things. It is.
Well, it's hard for people to take. It's a lot of steps, right? It's like I have to presume that they're making craft and then they're flying craft. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of jumps to get to the point, and they're crashing them. So it's like,
right? No, you're right. Yeah,
it's similar. We talked about the beginning of our podcast about Bigfoot. You get to the point where you're like, okay, is not only do you believe in this creature, but then you start making other hypotheses based on what it's doing, where it's going, where it's migrating. And there's a whole part of the population that laughs at you. Bigfoot migrating? Are you crazy? But the science, we laid out that case, and on a lot of our previous episodes, we've already laid out this case that these things, there's a physicality to all of this. Physicality to angels interacting with humans, physicality to how they get from point A to point B, physicality to they're up in the skies. We brought on a guy that says anyone with a camera with slow motion can film them. And we talked about on this episode with him that, all these people who listen to our show, Tim, were sending us videos of slow motion and there's UFOs in them. We probably got 150 videos. And they're like, we're catching UFOs in our backyard.
And that's a good point because, I contend that there's way more UFOs flying around in our atmosphere than we think, way more. And I think that the normative operation of the UFO, when it's highly energized, in other words, when it's traversing the sky, renders it invisible. Let's put it that way. So I think when these things are highly energized, they're bending, they're using gravity waves, they're bending the atmosphere around them, they're bending the medium, they're not moving through the medium of the atmosphere or through the water. They're bending that medium around the craft. They're bending space-time. And so when you do that, we know what happens. If you can bend using gravity, if you can bend the fabric of space, well, guess what else you bend? Light. And so you're bending the light around the craft, and this is what Lazar said. And so when these things are highly energized, they're invisible. And that's why sometimes they seemingly disappear, because they just energize and we can't see them anymore. From our point of view, they are invisible. They're still there in many cases, but they're rendered invisible from our point of view. And so if you think about that, then you can imagine a scenario in which there's way more UFOs moving around in the atmosphere that we can't see.
Yeah. And that's kind of that's just what I've been thinking about the last couple months, because we got all those videos from people. I mean, and that's the cool thing about a podcast like this is people can send you videos from all over the United States, all over the world. People were filming them in, Europe, and they were sending them to us. They were in Australia, New Zealand, and here in America, and everyone's capturing. It's not a bird. It's not a plane. It's very quick in a 240 frames per second video. So it was kind of a cool little science experiment that we did on the show based on that episode. And it seems like there's millions of these things flying around all the time.
There are a whole lot of satellites out there too. But when you look at a satellite, remember a satellite's in
this is daytime. This is like daytime footage.
Right. But even the satellites you can see sometimes during the day. However, if you see an object moving and then come to a dead stop in the sky, that is not a satellite.
Yeah.
And that is not a balloon, and that is not a jet. If something is moving through the heavens and then suddenly stops, you have a UFO. Or if it's moving and then suddenly jolts off in an accelerated rate of speed, you have a UFO. Or if it takes a sharp right angle turn, you have a UFO. We don't none of our helicopters can do any of that. Helicopter can hover, but it can't suddenly accelerate at an incredible speed. It can't take a really sharp right angle turn at high rates of speed. So, if you see a light in the sky at nighttime and it's moving slow and then it stops and then it's moving slow again, that could be a helicopter, right? Or if you see a light at nighttime that's just moving slow, traversing the sky in a straight line, it's probably, if it's just a speck of light, it's probably a satellite. So there's a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of stuff. A lot of it has prosaic explanations. But as I said, the phenomenon is burgeoning, and there's no question about that. It really is. It is burgeoning. And again, by burgeoning, I mean it is increasing.
I want to make a point too here, Tim, that I think is important. I think that there are a fair amount of people out there that don't buy Bob Lazar, and that's fine. These are independent. These are independent things. They're independent silos. These are independent people but I think what's interesting is that it's corroborative, right? And so I'll just say this, like, you can throw out Bob Lazar, and we talked about him a little bit here, and say, he was a kook and none of these said was real. In light of what came out this last week, it leads a lot of credence to that, but you don't need that to believe this. And so I think that's an important thing, because we've talked about Bob Lazar on the show before, and it touches a nerve with some folks that don't want to buy his story or the circumstances around his education, whatever it may be, right? But I want to make that point to say that these are independent testimonies, independent stories, independent actions, decades apart, and they're not dependent on each other for corroboration, but they do in fact corroborate each other. So
that's right.
So
that's a good point.
It is, and I think it's not necessary because people will want to throw the baby out with the bathwater sometimes if they don't buy Bob Lazar for whatever reason they've decided. Right? They went on Rogan, they don't like him. They think they read his Wikipedia page, which is a bunch of propaganda. Whatever it is, it has no bearing on this except that what he was saying in the 80s is being said again by someone with a lawyer, protected by the
lawyer. That's right.
Protected by the whistleblower laws now.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking to Congress about things Congress supposedly has no knowledge of. So take it as you will. We talked about the Vegas story, and you take a lot of these things with grains of salt. But this is a little different. And to me, as I said before, it does feel a bit Snowden-like, just on a much grander scale, because we're not exposing the crimes of our own government, which is a big deal. Listen, the fact that the Patriot Act never ended, and they're using that to spy on us, and probably listen to this conversation right now. You put your tinfoil hat on. It's probably happening. Mm-hmm. That's a big deal, and that's what Snowden exposed, and he's been huge. And he's in hiding because of this, which is the irony of that is crazy.
And that's one of the things that people say. Well, how come Snowden was able to come out and how come he had to run for his life and is living in Russia? Well, because there was no committee in Congress investigating the intelligence agency spying on the American people. Quite the contrary. The Congress is always carrying water for the intelligence community, covering for the intelligence community. There was no widespread knowledge or conversation in the media of the intelligence agency spying on us. It was unfriendly territory.
Yeah.
The architecture was not in place for Snowden to come out and blow the whistle and be protected by Congress and be able to have the media actually willing to give him any credibility. It was a totally different environment. The hostility against him was almost universal, just like with Julian Assange, almost universal. So those are different scenarios.
You said that on the top, and I wanted to reiterate that point that what's different here, everyone listening, is that now there's protocol in place that protects these people from coming out. Because look at Snowden, he's taken asylum in Russia. Look at Assange, he is literally had to hide in an embassy for years to avoid essentially exposing the powers that be. And then what's interesting about this, and you pointed this out, I just want to reiterate it, is this is not necessarily exposing the government, but factions of the black projects, which may or may not have affiliation with high levels of the underground deep dumb state, as you say, deep state government. So it's a bit different. It's not necessarily the flag, even though there's probably elements of the flag here, but it's a different animal, and now he, as we say, we'll read it again. He has protections for this.
Yeah,
and I think that's probably the only reason he would come out, right? And he's got his lawyer, and he's doing things within the lanes that he now has protections for.
Well, this last week, when we talked to Derek, all three major UFO crash sites that human beings civilians got to the crash site before the government, right? Every single story. Everyone involved was threatened with their life. If you talk about this, you're done. And that was well documented in all those cases. And this is in the 30s, 40s, this is like a long time ago. So this leads me to my next question, Tim. So they've had this technology. Let's say the Roswell event happened exactly how all the people down the rabbit hole say it did. We're closing in on, 90 years. It's been a long time. And some of these whistleblowers are coming out now, and they're afraid for their life. Is it because they're catching wind that they're going to do something with all this technology? There's some sort of mass event that they're going to create?
Well, remember that David Grusch, aside from being an officer in the intelligence agencies, was working for the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, the Pentagon's official body for investigating UFOs. He was just doing his job. They tell him, here's your resources, paltry as they were. Go and investigate UAPs. Go find out what they are. I always said it was a dog and pony show. They're never going to read them into these programs. By the way, I would make a distinction, and this maybe will help clarify this terminology I've invented, between the deep state and the dumb state. So when I say deep state, I'm not referencing when I say dumb state, I'm not referencing the deep state. I'm making a delineation between the deep state, which is permanent Washington, the intelligence community, the FBI, that sort of thing, and the dumb state, which is the deep underground military bases, these secret installations where they are doing who knows what, genetic experimentation, where they're reverse engineering alien craft. Maybe they got some Bigfoots down there. And I'm dead serious about that. Yeah. So, so I guess you can think of the dumb state as that's part of the blurry verse, whereas the deep state is more of the political apparatus that controls the who's in power and what can be said and that sort of thing. So it's sort of like the political entity. And I think that this really dovetails with the occult when you talk about the dumb state and also the deep state. I think when you get to the upper echelons, and I think we realize that with Podesta's emails, and what was her name? What was that woman's name? A witch that they were all enmeshed with, entangled with, Abramovich, whatever her name was. That all the Hollywood people are all, they're all aficionados or acolytes of this woman. Maria Abramovich, I think is her name, something like that. And I can't remember her name exactly. But when you get to the highest levels of these organizations, you start to get into the occult. I don't think you can separate the occult from the highest levels of the intelligence agencies at this point. Certainly the dumb state, it's just the way it is. It's like these people have strategically taken these organizations over, which is very interesting because that would denote some kind of a strategic conspiracy, right? To infiltrate the highest levels, these organizations and of these organizations. And one has to wonder, are all these people a part of the same cult? Are they all quote unquote Illuminati, or is it fractionated? Are they all members of different sects, Skull and Bones over here and the Knights of Malta over there, whatever. It's very intriguing though. I just wanted to, that sort of jumped in my mind. I think when we think about deep state and dumb state, again, I make the delineation between the two. I think at the very top echelon of both of these terms, we find the occult.
Yeah. So you think like Grusch, like he was just doing his job, and instead of just trying to like do a bad job, but keep his job, he might have done he did a better job than he should have. And then he got into some stuff that he couldn't handle and got spooked.
I think, and this is the way he says it, by the way, he does explain this, that he was just doing his job and he realized that Congress was not being read in to this classified program, the crash retrieval program. And he was incensed, like, wait a minute, if Congress is over here investigating UAPs and we're over here for the Pentagon investigating UAPs and you guys have them, well, it's illegal for you not then to reveal this information and to obfuscate it. That's illegal. That is traitorous. You can't do that. You cannot obfuscate information from a task force that's been given the authority to find out everything it can about UAPs and then slam the door in their face when they actually get to something tangible. You can imagine if this guy really is a good investigator, and there's lots of journalists who are like this. You have a good investigator, really wants to get to the bottom of it, and then he's getting a door slammed in his face when he gets close to anything tangible. Well, at that point, you're going to lose faith in the system, and you're going to feel like, well, what's the point of my job? You're just trying to distract me over here with these stories of lights in the sky or whatever, when you've got the goods, right? You've got the goods, and then he's knocking on the door, right? He wants to be read into these programs, or he's pressing, talking to people behind the scenes, and they don't like it. The generals who are in charge of these programs and the private contractors who are actually running them, they don't like that. That's their territory, and they lashed out at him. They did what they've been doing for decades. They threatened him, and I think he was very smart by grabbing a lawyer, probably finding cover with some of his contacts, some people who might be able to protect him. And by the way, he said he was encouraged by other members of the intelligence community to come forward. Why? Because the apparatus exists now. The architecture is in place. So it makes sense that if we were going to have a whistleblower of this magnitude, that it would have happened now. Doesn't it make sense? With all these other things going on, with the cover that we have in Congress, it makes sense. And so it's really not as absurd as a lot of people want to make it. A lot of people do a lot of hand waving motions and try and just say things that, for example, what we talked about before, that so we have these advanced aerospace vehicles, this alien craft coming from other planets or whatever, and being piloted by advanced entities, and then they come and crash on Earth. Oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's hand waving. That's just hand waving. Or to say, oh, I don't believe any. Oh, the media's saying it, the government's saying it, therefore I don't believe it. That's just hand waving. You're not offering any kind of logical explanation as to why these things might be happening. You're not taking stock of the context in which these things are happening. You're not getting granular. You're not getting high resolution. You're being very low resolution in your analysis. And I always try to encourage people to be more high resolution in your analysis. Look at all of the data, look at all of the motives all around, and have a more complex view. Embrace the complexity, as I always say. Embrace the complexity of what might be going on here. And don't be afraid to do so. Because if you want to get to the truth, that's how you do it.
Well, didn't he also say part of it was that people were getting killed?
Yes, and he said that people have been killed. Not only by the aliens in some cases, but also by the government and by the private contractors. I think they wanted to kill the Tsar, and they came close to killing him. But they didn't have to. The media was laughing at him. They didn't have to kill him. I mean, it's just when you have the media on your side, and when you have apathy, when Congress is apathetic towards something and is afraid to take it serious because they don't want the ridicule, then you don't need to kill anybody. But that's not the case anymore. So this is a very interesting scenario for David Grusch to be in. I'm sure, he's always a little bit nervous about having, being one of those died suddenly cases, heart attack or something like that. Yeah. I would be if I were him. We certainly have the technology to induce heart attacks in people very easily from a distance.
Jeez. So is this what is this all building up to, Tim? Like, what do you think? What do you think is going to happen? What's on the horizon in your mind?
Well, we need to see what happens with the threats that Congress is making to the Pentagon about seriously investigating these locations that David Grusch has handed to them. If those are idle threats, then this is just sort of going to fizzle for a little while, fizzle out a little bit. It won't go away, but it'll fizzle out a little bit. And we'll continue along this. Congress is investigating UAPs and AARO is investigating this story here, that story there. We'll get the sort of leaks we've been getting since 2017. I have a feeling that right now, if I were to guess, I would say that these members of Congress who have been vocal about investigating the evidence that's been handed to them, I'll bet they've had some visits from intelligence community members and from some of these private contracting people who are basically warning them not to try and gain access to these facilities and so forth. And what's being said behind the scenes. National security, right? We can't tell you this because of national security. This is a grave danger to the security of the United States. We don't want this technology to fall into the hands of our enemies. This is what's being told to these people behind the scenes. So are they going to chicken out? That's the question. Is Congress going to chicken out? Probably. I don't have any faith in Jill DeBran. That's a dog and pony show. She loves the attention she's getting, by the way. You can see it every time. Every time that woman's on camera talking about this, she absolutely loves all this attention she's getting as the UFO hunter, the UAP hunter. Her hearings are a joke. They're not going anywhere. I mean, I guess I laud her attempt at getting to the truth, but I mean, let's just put it this way. We're talking about non-human craft that's been recovered, bodies, and has been reverse engineered. Mm-hmm. That's the magnitude. We can't even get to the bottom of stuff about Joe Biden in Ukraine. Well, we can't even get to the bottom of where exactly coronavirus came from, because these people in Congress, they're gutless, a lot of them. And those things are far inferior to this. So I don't have a whole lot of confidence that, if Congress can't force the FBI to do its job and to stop being tyrannical and to stop being partial in its investigations, how is it going to get the deep state and the dumb state to tell the truth and to give them access to anything? It just seems like idle threats from Congress. So that's a long-winded answer. I think we're just going to kind of idle for a while. I think we're going to kind of idle. I don't know that we're going to see we may see some more whistleblowers right on the heels of this. In fact, today, I didn't watch it. I was going to actually watch it tonight or tomorrow. I saw Stephen Greer was giving his presentation, I think, to Congress, I believe, to Congress today. And I don't know if he's bringing forward more whistleblowers. He may be. I know there are more whistleblowers. So it is, I don't know. I guess nobody can really predict where this is going to go. But ultimately, if you read my book, Birthright, you know that I believe that, number one, the alien threat is real. And number two, it's going to be used as the pretext to formulate a one world government, or at least consolidate power in a one world government type body, whether that be the United Nations or something new, and that we are ultimately going to be delivered from this threat by the offspring of the dragon and his angels, by the hybrid offspring of the dragon, or perhaps even by the dragon himself. So that's my working hypothesis of where this is going ultimately. And all of this, by the way, fits into my hypothesis. I predicted in my book that we were going to have disclosure, and that ultimately, eventually, we were going to be told about the alien presence, specifically about the Greys, and we were going to be made, and the threat was going to be made known in no uncertain terms. And that's when things will really kick into high gear.
Mm. Yeah, it's hard to imagine. It's hard for a lot of people. You have to expand your paradigm really quick. And I was telling a friend the other day, like, I feel like most people, in their understanding of all these topics, whether it's politics, whether it's theology, religion, they're kind of a rubber band, and they've been stretched to the max. You throw in some of this UFO stuff and it just snaps. They haven't allowed themselves to be able to add a few more things to the basket. Here it is. It's just like they have a very tight, maxed out view of the world, the cosmos, even just how they read the Bible. And there's no room. It's gonna blow a lot of fuses. And so I know people have probably been a lot more heat than normal in the old comments section lately, all over the place, on everyone's page, because everyone's posting this stuff. And anyone who has a podcast, paranormal podcast, or a conspiracy show, or all this stuff, it's getting wild. It's getting weird out there.
It's getting very hostile, definitely, in the comments on social media. Definitely. And you're right. Just when people think they got it all figured out, aliens. I mean, people are just, so many people are just now coping with Nephilim.
Right.
And Bigfoot.
Tim, it's like when you say that, it reminds me of that meme of the dude from Ancient Aliens, and he's doing, he's got his hands out and it says aliens, and here we are, and I think Nate nailed it on the head. I think this was an easy thing to kind of just push out there and be like, yeah, we can talk about that. But when it confronts our paradigms and it shows up in mainstream media, and you're forced to try to contextualize this, and all you've done is really ignore this. Has the capacity to really break people's paradigms, brains. Yeah. I mean, it does. This is something now you have to figure out, how does this fit? That's kind of what we try to do on the show. And we tried from the beginning, Nate, is like, how does this fit? Like, how do we contextualize this from a biblical standpoint? Like, how do we look at this and make this make sense? Because And I think part of the great delusion, if we're to understand this, Tim, from macro level, is that people will take things like this and it will cause them to abandon their faith. And certainly, I think that's a reality, right? If this exists, then how does then my faith must not be real. And I think I love what you do, because you've been doing this for a long time. This isn't like you just jumped in this last 3-4 months and decided this was a fun topic, and you're going to talk about it. You've been hammering this home for a while, and I appreciate that about you, because like you said, you've been sounding the trumpet and the alarm, saying this is coming. And I want people just to realize that, like, there's a time keeping your head in the sand is no longer, and you can come to different conclusions about this. That's okay. The important thing is to think about this, and if you're a believer, to try to put this within your, in the context of our faith, and there's room for this, and I think that's what Nate and I are trying to do, is trying to find a space, and ultimately is to find a space to discuss these things, and say that, look, this fits. You talk about the dragon and offsprings, and that's maybe one of the things I wanted to ask quickly. We talked about, as I kind of gone this diatribe, but you talked about how at the high levels of the dumb state, the deep state, it really is an occult. There's a collective of the occult, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if that's the case, then and they're collecting this technology, and maybe you already kind of addressed this, but just in your mind, the purpose of this then too, is this to build a Joel 2 army? Is this for world domination, to essentially to take the nations of the earth into submission underneath the asymmetrical warfare? Is this about power? Like if you're serving, the darkness, really, as the cult is, if you're serving the darkness, collecting this technology with the predication this is happening, according to the whistleblower.
Yeah, I would say that generally speaking, I think we can identify these individuals who are steeped in the occult at the high levels of these various organizations, and the intelligence community, the military, collectively, the deep state, the dumb state. We can categorize them as Luciferians. Luciferians, of course, are people who take the Bible and turn it upside down. It's the inverse of the gospel of Christ. It's the inverse of the biblical narrative that the gods exist. Yes, they will affirm that the gods exist, but they believe that the God of the Bible, that Yahweh, is the enemy. So they don't deny the existence of Yahweh. They understand that he is real, and they hate him. And they give their allegiance to the being they call Lucifer. And by Lucifer, who they're really identifying as the dragon, the enemy of Yahweh. Whether they just believe that Yahweh is some sort of a spiritual force and the dragon is a spiritual force, and maybe not is a person in the way that we would think. I'm sure there's a very variegated belief system among these Luciferians. It is interesting, though, that when you have atheistic Satanists, most of them don't believe in the devil. An atheistic Satanist does not believe in the devil. They just believe in rebellion. They hate Christianity. They hate the traditional morals of American society. They're just reprobate
for a little while longer,
right?
I don't think they're going to be able to do that for much longer.
No, they won't. No, they're just reprobate. So a Luciferian is not like that. A Luciferian does believe in the gods, and that's why the religion of the future is not the absence of religion. It is a belief in the gods. It's what I say in my book. They believe in the gods. They embrace the existence of the gods, who would be these extraterrestrial beings, and they will endeavor to become like them. And not all of these extraterrestrial beings, by the way. I think a specific faction of these beings will be embraced as the gods by them. So, but there's who knows? I mean, we can only speculate as to what exactly these people, their goal is, because their goals may have changed when they had functional advanced technology placed into their hands that maybe can allow them to build a base on Mars. That's not out of the question. If you're talking about reverse engineering advanced technology, non-human technology, I don't believe, by the way, let me put a little asterisk on this. I don't believe that we've been extremely successful in that project, in that enterprise, reverse engineering this technology. I think a lot of it depends on exotic matter, which we don't have access to, and we can't synthesize. But I think that we've been able to derive our own technologies, hybridized craft, from the concepts, from the physics that we've learned. And if you give Luciferians that kind of power, what are they going to do? Well, on the political realm, they're going to try and, I think the depopulation agenda is certainly a Luciferian agenda. It's not just a sinister agenda in that it's just evil. No, it's a conspiracy that has a very clear goal in mind, and the goal is not to protect the earth. That's not what the goal is. So there's something going on within the occult. You'll see, for example, if you read the works of Manly P. Hall, who was one of the greatest Masonic philosophers, a very good writer, actually, Manly P. Hall, very, very highly intelligent man. I've read some of his works. Manly P. Hall talks about the end goal of his organization, of the Masons, is to enthrone the philosopher king. This person that they call the philosopher king. They also refer to him as the great prince. And in fact, they call this the great work, is to bring about the birth and the enthronement of this individual. Of course, we as Christians would identify that individual as the Antichrist. And so we can certainly specify that one of the primary goals of the Luciferians is to enthrone the Antichrist, for sure. Whoever that individual is, however that comes about. And that is, of course, the iconography of the obelisk and the dome. This goes, we don't have to go down this rabbit trail, but very briefly, the obelisk represents the phallus of Osiris, which was fashioned by Isis, and the golden phallus of Osiris, and the dome represents the womb of Isis. And when Isis resurrected her husband Osiris, she fashioned for him a phallus because his body was divided. That's a whole story that goes back to the Egyptian story of Osiris and Set. She collected the dismembered parts of his body, but she couldn't find his phallus. In other words, his male organ. She couldn't find it. It was swallowed by a fish in one story, swallowed by a crocodile in another. So she had to devise a new one. She had to build one. She had to manufacture through sorcery a golden phallus. Why did she have to do this? Because she wanted to copulate with Osiris, bring him back to life and copulate with him in order to bring forth their hybrid son. Rather, their son, their godson, really. And that was Horus. And Horus is represented by what? The all-seeing eye. That's Horus. That's the eye of Horus. And so you have the obelisk and the dome, the phallus of Osiris and the womb of Isis. And what does it represent? It represents bringing forth, giving birth to this philosopher king, this great king, the prince who is to come, and enthroning him and bringing about a resurrection of the Atlantean world order, bringing about the resurrection of the empire of the gods. That is ultimately the great plan of the Luciferian elite. That is what they are endeavoring to do. How aliens play into that, how this technology plays into that is anyone's guess. Again, I have my own theories that I write about, that I offer in my book. But you can be assured that the Luciferian elite want to enthrone who they believe will be the son of Satan, the hybrid son of Satan.
Looking at you right now, Tim, you're just a little blurry on the camera, which is awesome.
I can fix that.
No, don't fix it. It's on brand.
Yeah, it's on brand. Tim's just going on the most blurry, the blurry rant, and there's just multiple.
And being blurry while I do it.
Well, Tim, we probably should have said this at the beginning of the hour, because I think a lot of people who tune into our show, you've been in these rabbit holes for decades, and it's hard for people to listen to us talk about some of these things matter-of-factly, right? They go, "Where's the evidence? Where's the proof?" And we always relate things to Bigfoot on this show. But at this point in my life, Bigfoot's almost a little bit like, I don't even have the time to try to explain to you all the evidence that exists for this creature. And I honestly don't waste time sometimes trying to convince it to people. And you've been down some of these rabbit holes, and the same with the Nephilim. Like people are yelling on our channels the other day about how they're the sons of Seth, and you're crazy if you believe this. It's like you've devoted half your life to proving that these giants were real and they were building stuff. And it's probably hard to even engage at this point because you're you know what I mean? So you talk about these things. Yeah, you
feel like you are not, I don't want to say wasting time, but it's exhausting to backtrack and try and bring people up to speed. I certainly can concur with that.
Yeah, but it isn't that you don't care about these topics. It's just like you did at some point. You're 15. How do you bring someone who has never seriously looked into the Bigfoot topic or the Nephilim topic, and then how do you bring them up to speed and try to encapsulate where your mind is now versus where it is? So your mind is, that's probably some of the fascination early on. That was my fascination, was trying to figure out what Bigfoot was, and then I got into all these rabbit holes. But trying to talk to people now who want to know, they want to learn, they want to understand these concepts, but they're so skeptical because they've never heard a lot of this stuff, and they think, "Wow, where is Tim coming up with this information? Where is he pulling these things from? How does he come to these conclusions?" Factions of aliens? I don't even think there are aliens now. There's factions, But anyway, we probably should have said that at the top of the hour. If you're still with us, you're you know what I mean?
To the blurry verse.
But I think sometimes when we talk at this point, that's where we're at in a lot of these topics. Is if you devoted yourself to a paranormal podcast, you've written books, you've been all over the world investigating these things. It's not just something you woke up one day and thought.
And I'm going to be with you guys in a week.
Let's go.
Investigating these things.
Can't wait.
In Peru.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, I actually think that this conversation we're having right now, we're able to have this conversation so casually because of the groundwork we've laid in our other conversations. We don't have to go back and retread,
right?
Because we've already covered that ground. We've already laid that foundation. And it's pretty interesting, isn't it? Don't you think? Over the last, how long have I been talking with you guys? A year and a half, something like that, maybe 2. I don't remember.
It's 2 years, I think. I think we
about
had you
2
on.
years, and so we've sort of been laying.
It's been beautiful.
It's
been beautiful the entire time. I mean, it just feels like yesterday, Tim.
Tim's in focus now.
We've been laying the groundwork for what happened this week.
Yeah.
And so here we are now discussing what should be a natural. The natural progression of the things we've been saying. So it shouldn't really come as a surprise that now we have a whistleblower talking about reverse engineering alien technology. I mean, we were talking about reverse engineering alien technology way back how many episodes ago when we were getting into the abduction phenomenon and all that kind of stuff. And so this is just it's just a natural progression. It is the logical progression of the conversations that we've been having. And now it's like, okay, here it is. It's real, and it's not, I told you so. It's just, this is why we took the time to do that, because I was predicting, and I'm sure you guys were predicting, that at some point in time, this disclosure stuff was going to heat up and we were going to get something that was extraordinary. And I think this is extraordinary. It really is. And so you can live the rest of your life without ever thinking about giants or Bigfoot or aliens and be perfectly fine. You can. You don't have to contemplate these things. And people say to me, why is it important why is it important in terms of, your faith and all that? Well, or necessary. Not important, necessary. Why is it necessary? Well, the answer is it's not. Because there's plenty of believers all around the world who believe in Christ who aren't up to speed on any of this, but they believe in Christ. And that's the essential thing. That's the essential thing. But if you are like me and like you guys, and you're very contemplative and you're very curious and you're fascinated, I think a lot of this is just fascination. When you talk about Bigfoot and multiple dimensions and aliens and all these other cryptids, it's really driven, at least in my life, by just fascination. I'm just fascinated in the possibility of these topics. And so I take my fascination and then I sort of mix it with the other side of my brain, which is this desire to distill things down into core elements of truth, so that I can have a paradigm that is somewhat accurate. So I'm not just fascinated by stuff. I also have a working paradigm that has factual information that's the bedrock, right? And so I scrutinize and I distill these things down to what I can touch, what's tangible, what I can understand. And the things that I can't touch and that I don't understand, I don't throw them out the window. They don't form the bedrock of my paradigm. And at the very center of my paradigm is the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Come on now.
Because that is my anchor. I believe in Jesus Christ because I believe in the resurrection. I believe that this person was who he says he was because there is really good evidence for the resurrection of Christ, that he rose from the dead, the corroborating evidence, the testimony, and the historical documentation of some of the events that surrounded the resurrection. And so that's just an example. So that's the bedrock of my belief system. And then I try and grope for other things that I can grab onto and understand as tangibly real. And that's sort of how I work this garden of my paradigm. I view my paradigm as a garden. and you're in there and you're pruning things and you're cutting things off that are dead and not producing any fruit, and you're planting new things to see if they grow, and you're just constantly, you're expanding the walls of your garden, and you're constantly trying to have the healthiest garden that you can possibly produce. And so I don't take offense if something that I thought was true turns out not to be. It doesn't break me. It doesn't crush my worldview as it pertains to these fantastical things that we talk about, as it pertains to giants and cryptids and aliens. I just sort of, I just try and get to the truth, to the bottom of things. And I'm saying this to help people view this as just your gardening and your paradigm. And now you've got this alien thing to deal with. Don't have some sort of a hostile reaction that is emotional. Rather, just step back, contemplate it, and stick it into your paradigm and see if it bears fruit. You don't have to get all up in arms about it. And I'm addressing the hostility that you mentioned that you're seeing in social media, and I'm addressing the hostility that I'm seeing in mine, and L.A. Marzulli can attest to the same, and everybody who's in this world is seeing an increase in hostility. And so I'm just trying to encourage people to be a little bit patient and mindful and conscious about this thing called a paradigm that we all have, and all of our paradigms are different. Anyway, I don't exactly know why I like that, but I did. I said it.
I like that, Tim.
I did too.
That's a good word. It's an important word too. Is that we're all just trying to figure this out, right? And I'm glad you pointed it back to what the thing that matters, right? Is your salvation and your faith in the resurrection and deity of Jesus Christ. That he took the keys of sin and death, and that he holds our salvations, and he redeemed us into the family of God. That's what matters. But these things are worth thinking about, because like I said at the beginning too, and I think it's important, is that people will throw out their faith based upon being confronted with things that they don't perceive as fitting. And I think it's important to have these discussions and to think, I mean, you're right. These weird people like to think about this. Maybe it isn't everyone's cup of tea, but it's worth thinking about, because I think the implications are huge, whether it be salvation, one, and two, what is unfolding before us in our own lifetimes. And potentially it's our children's lifetimes, and these things are important. They're important to talk about, and I think if we don't address it, and I say this, and I will beat this drum forever. The world is more than willing to disciple us in their own narrative and what they want us to believe.
Exactly,
and it's much more important that we look at this from a biblical standpoint.
And also, I just think the Bible starts with a tree of life, and it ends with the tree of life. Like this supernatural tree I think the bookends of the Bible that's a strange story. How do you believe in the tree of life if you don't fill in the blanks with all this other weird cosmic stuff that goes on in our realm? You know what I'm saying? So I think a lot of people will read the Bible a different way, but when they realize all these other blurry things out there exist, they start to go, I can trust the beginning to the end.
You're trying to start another episode now on the Tree of Life. I am. I know what you're doing.
But it does, right?
Yeah, it does.
And it's okay. It's okay to just not know. I am perfectly happy with not knowing. Yes. It doesn't make me nervous. It doesn't make me anxious. I know there's people who get anxious when they can't figure something out. Don't be anxious. There's nothing to be anxious about. If you're anchored in Christ, in the gospel of Christ, you don't need to be anxious about anything. Nothing should shake your faith. Yeah. And now if you're anchored in emotions and experiential faith, or if you're anchored in a particular worldview, like you are just, this doctrine defines me, for example, if you're just a pre-tribulational rapture guy and that doctrine defines you, you're going to be a little anxious. You're going to have some anxiety, because if something starts to maybe contradict that, you start to get a little hostile, because you're almost like your identity is wrapped around this doctrine. People do this with flat Earth. Their identity, their the way that they view everything through this prism of flat Earth, it's all consuming, and so they get very irritable when that is challenged, or if other people don't believe it. And that's how I think you can recognize that you're going a little bit overboard when you start to feel irritable when people don't agree with your perspective. I don't care if people agree with my perspective of things. It doesn't matter. I believe in the gospel of Christ, and as long as people believe in Christ, that he was the Son of God, exactly who he said he was, and that he did what he said he did, That to me, that is my ultimate goal. And all these other things are important. And I believe they're important, becoming increasingly important. It's going to be very difficult to ignore them as time goes on. But ultimately, there's no reason for anxiety. There's no reason for hostility. There's no reason for fear. And you know what? If you start to posture yourself like that, and you just sort of allow things to be what they are and stop trying to control them like a piece of clay, like you're getting your hands in, you're trying to always make it flat earth, or you're trying to always make it demon or whatever, it's very exhausting.
Yeah,
it really is. But if you just sit back and let things be what they are, and have a complex, allow for the complexity of the universe to manifest itself however it's going to, as long as you're anchored in the gospel, you're going to be much happier from that kind of a posturing. So again, I didn't plan on saying any of that or going there, but maybe people need to hear that.
I think that feels right. Well, Tim, dude, as always, I love these discussions, man. I love getting out there and interpreting, in this case, what's happening right now. And then of course bringing it back to a perspective that I think people need, and that is that this isn't, as you say, this isn't a hand waving or hand wringing incident in this last week, but something to consider and maybe put in your garden with the thought that this can fit within my paradigm, as what's the metaphor you're using, and I like that. I like that a lot. And I'm excited, man.
Put it in your pipe and smoke it.
Yeah, roll it up in an to a mapacho, and I'm excited. Yeah. I'm excited to hang next week in Peru.
2 weeks.
2 weeks. Sorry, yeah. I'm already fast forwarding. You're going to be there next week, but
I'm going to be there.
We're going to meet. We're going to meet you there. I love these conversations, man. I'm grateful for you and your friendship. And you've been so great to our show, and I really think that you have so much to add. I'm not going to pat you on the back to your horn. I'd like to, though, because I think you have so much to add to this conversation. I think this is the time that you have prepared for, and so we're glad that you're here. You're glad that you've invested in us, and we're just excited that we get to spend some time with you and talk about these hard topics and these hard things which confront everybody today. So, man, I love this, and pumped to see you in Peru. I know that you got.
I'm ecstatic to hang out with you guys in my second home, my home away from home.
Yeah.
I will say that this episode's been about the physicality of this craft and these aliens and this technology, right? And that's what you've really done on our show, I think, is you've tried to put this in physical terms that human beings can understand. That. And not to kick a dead horse here to bring back what I just talked about, but when I was a kid, I believed the tree of life in a way that a kid believes in the tree of life. And then I got to an age of, that's just a metaphor. That's just a story. But a lot of our conversations with you about all the physicality of these things now has me thinking that tree is a physical tree. People do eat from it. It exists somewhere, or it existed somewhere, and we can eat from it. So it's come full circle for me that I don't believe it like a child believes Santa Claus. I have proof from all these other things that we've talked about that help me go, okay, that's not out of the realm of possibilities. In fact, it's mentioned a lot, and we've teased about doing an episode on this with you or somebody.
You're just priming the pump, dude.
I'm just pregnant. Just pregnant with me.
We need to do an episode on the Garden of Eden.
Yeah,
we do.
But I like that about it. There is a physicality to this phenomena. Take it or leave it. You can fight it all you want. There's spiritual aspects to it. There's demonic activity around it. There's occult activity around it, but there is a physicality that is undeniable. Hundreds of whistleblowers over the last 50 years have been coming out. And here we are at the dawn of, it should be on the front lines of every newspaper, but it won't be, which is really weird.
And I agree. Tim, I want you to share everybody what you've been doing. We talked about before we started recording about what you've been working on. I know you've been hanging out with our friend L.A. Marzulli, friend of the show, who's been on a few times.
Oh, yeah,
Good friend of yours, and you also have some things cooking. I want you to tell everybody about it. And obviously, we're going to Peru, so we'll keep everybody updated as they listen to the show, and as we sort of put our things out on social, what we're doing, and hanging with you, and going and seeing the amazing megaliths and all of the wonder of Peru. But you've got a lot of things cooking, and I want you to kind of give a preview to everybody listening so they can tune in.
As people, I'm sure, are aware, I've mentioned it several times. I've been working on a TV show for the last few years. It was supposed to be on History Channel. That's a long story. Right now it's not, but it's going to appear somewhere in some shape or form, and it's finally done. I've got 3 episodes finished, color graded and everything. So that will be coming out this summer somewhere. I don't know where yet. L.A. Marzulli, speaking of L.A. Marzulli, he came to Peru. I brought him to Peru to do some further investigating of the elongated skulls, the Procus elongated skulls. That's one of the episodes. We had a great time, him and Chase Kletsky. And we found some, I think honestly, this particular episode, this particular film on the elongated skulls is probably the best, the most comprehensive investigation into the elongated skulls anybody's ever done. Aside from LA and Chase, who part of what they did is featured in this episode. So it's sort of an addendum. It's an addition to what the work that they did down there as well. And of course, stuff I've done independently too. And we sort of combined forces for that. So I'm really excited for people to see that. I don't know when and where. So I don't know when exactly you're going to be able to see it. And I don't know where exactly you're going to be able to see it, but that's coming to a conclusion very shortly here. And obviously we've got Peru, and then we've got in the winter, we've got Costa Rica and some secret projects we're working on together in between.
Yes.
And so that's primarily what I've been doing. I've got another book that I'm working on.
That's the Blurry Dumb State project. We're just dumb. That's
heavy on dumb. Yeah.
But, so I've got another book in the works, but it's, people shouldn't get too excited yet because let's put it this way. It's not a blurry book. It's more in the health and wellness space. I've got to get this thing out of my system. It's a really good.
You got the Hans and Franz book coming out.
And it's, but I had to get this one out of my system. I wanted to write this, and I'm thinking, man, this can help a lot of people. It really can. And so that's coming next in terms of a book. And then I'm sure I'll be working on something back in the realm of, back in the Blurryverse, so to speak. So, that's the kind of stuff I got going on. I'm probably forgetting a bunch of stuff, but
it's all right. We can fill them in. We'll fill them in.
Birthright. Get the book Birthright if you haven't yet. And go subscribe to Tim on his YouTube channel. It's your main bread and butter in terms of you communicating with your audience.
Also on Twitter. And
Twitter too.
Instagram. Those are the 3 I'm really active on. And by the way, if you're not on Twitter now, get on Twitter. It's the most entertaining place anywhere in terms of social media. It's where Tucker Carlson is publishing his new show. And it's especially with stuff like breaking news. Twitter is it's really fun, and it's easy to engage with people. That's really where I encourage people to follow me the most, is on Twitter, because I could do YouTube videos, obviously YouTube, but those take time, and those aren't I can't live commentary on stuff that's happening on YouTube. Because you got to do a video and you got to edit it or whatever. But Twitter's I like to jump on there and give my thoughts about stuff that's happening. So it's fun, and then feedback from people and stuff. Mm-hmm. I've been posing interesting questions like, does the kingdom of heaven have locality? And just sitting back and watching the debate unfold, which is really entertaining. So
almost as fun as the Cleveland area GNC. If you're Tim Alberino, going to pick up some creatine.
That's right.
Go back and find that episode if you haven't listened to it.
You never know when a UFO is going to fly over.
That's right. It just felt like it was apropos. Well, Tim, thanks again. Can't wait to hang. Can't wait to see you here in a few days.
Yeah, maybe the next time they'll be hearing from us is up in Cusco.
That's right.
Dude,
Nate will be riding a llama. It's gonna get weird.
That's right. The llama's got the sweet emo swoop. He's ready.
Right. He's been a Sherwood fan for a
long time.
He's been waiting for this moment.
Luke's gonna have the llama with the mullet, and we're gonna be.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm gonna get a really awesome
with the beard.
Yeah, I'm gonna get a really awesome Peruvian hat, and it is gonna be game on. I don't even know what that looks like, but I'm ready.
Eating some guinea pigs.
That's right.
You ready?
Riding some llamas.
Yeah. We might not come back. We might just be doing Blurry from Peru.
I know you'll come back. The charm wears off pretty quick.
What's his face? Who said don't put your hands up in Peru? I can't remember who said that. Someone on our show said don't put your hands in the air.
There's lots of jokes like that. Yeah,
it's a sign of I want to be abducted. Anyway, that's for another time. Thanks, Tim.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Tim. All right, buddy.
Until then.
Roll that time cop.
There we are. Feels
there
so
it is.
Immortalize that.
All right, gentlemen. I got to jump.
All right,
good to see you, Timmy.
Later.
Yep. Later.